the voices of members of parliament should prevail. The voices of members of parliament should be the ones which are loudest and talk to their governments to prevail on them to stop the war because of its negative effect.
Sudut Dengar Parlemen.
Distinguished audiences, welcome to Sudut Dengar Parlemen. This is a special edition of P20 event, the Parliamentary Forum and the 8th G20 Parliamentary Speaker Summit. I'm Silva Boas, I'll be hosting for today. We are so grateful today because we have one special honorable speaker, Her Excellency Nosiviwe Naluthando Mapisa-Nqakula.
Thank you.
She is the Speaker of National Assembly of South Africa. How are you?
I'm good, thank you very much. And I've enjoyed Jakarta, even though I haven't moved around, but just moving from the hotel coming here.
Wow.
I think I like it. I like the weather and the people.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So, what are the impressions that you experiencing for attending P20 event for the past 3 days?
You know, let me start by saying it was a beautiful event. Beautiful event, and our gratitude goes to Madam Speaker Maharanani.
Yes, Puan Maharani.
For her excellent leadership. I think she's done very, very well throughout, from the opening right up to the end. Well organized, everything done with precision, which you don't often get in these kinds of meetings. And I think it's something which I would have wanted to commend her for. And I hope that through this radio and to the people of Jakarta, people can learn to appreciate what she is doing. It was good. It well attended as well. And I think that the agenda was quite intense, but we were able to start on time and finish on time. But I think one of the things which to me were most humbling was the fact that the president opened a parliamentary forum. This is P20, it is not G20. And the president found the time to open. And I think it's one of those things which other countries should take note of, that heads of state, the head of state of this country, takes parliamentary activities very seriously. I'm raising this because even at the beginning of the year, we had a session in Bali of the IPU.
Yes.
And he was there to open the session. And I think that it's very important that as head of state, he demonstrates to everybody the importance of the third arm of the state. So I think that's one of those things which I really appreciated. As for the dinner, I don't know what to say about the dinner yesterday. I discovered that, in fact, the Parliament of Indonesia have a lot of musicians. And it was amazing, beautiful, just to see just how relaxing it can be. People were themselves. And I saw members of parliament actually singing and dancing. Beautiful. And so, in a sense, in a nutshell, I'm saying, in between the hard work which we're involved in, there was a lot of relaxation as well.
Yes.
Sudut Dengar Parlemen. Sudut Dengar Parlemen.
Mrs. Nqakula, we have like 4 main topics being discussed in P20, from the gender empowerment, as women empowerment, gender equality, the green economy, and so forth. So what is the main concern or issue that being highlighted by South Africa in particular?
Let me start with climate change, because it's one of those issues which were discussed here.
Yes.
Which is, as countries are preparing to go to Egypt to discuss issues of climate change, one of the critical issues is we see a situation where developing countries or even underdeveloped countries are being affected by the impact of climate change, which really is a result of, most of the time, effects of what is being done by developed countries. And a lot of discussion has occurred where developing countries have been saying, really, we have to be compensated by countries which are responsible for gas emissions, which are responsible because of the disasters which we are confronted with. And therefore, countries which really are responsible for what we are currently seeing right now should compensate developing countries in cases where you've had disaster. We've had a disaster recently in South Africa, where in KwaZulu-Natal, one of our provinces, in a town called Durban, where there were floods. And a lot of damage to infrastructure was caused. Many people died. Some have disappeared. They've not been found as yet. And we can only, all of us, agree that these are the effects of climate change. It's a clear demonstration that indeed the weather patterns worldwide are changing. We've seen floods in Pakistan. We've seen floods recently in Florida. And to us, all of us, it should be a demonstration of what the effects of climate change can do in a country. Now, it's not all of us who will be able to build or rebuild the infrastructure which has been damaged. And therefore, we do need this kind of funding, this kind of compensation by countries which can afford to do it. I think that's the one issue to me which is important, which is one of those issues which will be raised very strongly by our delegation to the meeting in Egypt on climate change. But the second matter is the matter of gender-based violence. We've talked about socio-economic issues.
Yes.
We've talked about the effects of the war between Ukraine and Russia. But for me, one thing which heads of state, speakers should look into is the impact of all of those on women and children. You talk the war, the people who are mostly affected by any conflict, even in a family home, by a war, are your women and children. Now, you also talk about the impacts of, negative impacts of COVID, right, in our society. The mostly affected are women and children. You talk about challenges of the economy. The most affected people are women. Because as we talk about the negative effects, for instance, of COVID-19 and the 2 year of hard lockdown, the people who were mostly affected are women. Women lost their businesses, small businesses. Women were subjected to a lot of abuse by their immediate, by their intimate, by their spouses. Women were affected by the effects of children who were not going to school and just having to look after those children and even those grandchildren. So I'm just saying it doesn't matter which angle you're coming from, whether you talk socio-economic issues, you talk issues of gender equality or inequality, you talk issues of climate change, your most affected people will be the women. And of course, issues of peace and security, which did come out. And if you look at what is currently going on in the world, we see now the war in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine. And then recently we saw a few missiles being sent through Chup by North Korea. We see exercises being conducted on the shores of Taiwan, right? You can just tell that there is no peace in the world. There's no peace in the world. And our biggest concern is that all of those things, at the end of it all, will impact on nations, will impact on ordinary people, and will, in the main, have terrible effects on the future of our countries, future of our nations, and that is the children.
Right. So that's very complicated issue, basically, but
Very
really
complicated
important.
indeed.
Yes.
Very complicated because it's an issue we never agree on. I mean, even here, if you were listening, when the discussion, when the issue of Russia and Ukraine was raised, immediately there was a clear standoff. You had those who are now supporting Russia and those who are supporting Ukraine. But actually, our role as parliamentarians should be to strive to narrow the gap between the two countries for the sake of the citizens of those countries, to try and get them together, narrow the gap so that they can prevail and put pressure on their heads of state to engage with them and say the war actually affects the women and the children. So I'm just saying it's an item which people never agree on, because there will be those who will obviously support a particular grouping, but the most important thing is that the voices of members of parliament should prevail. The voices of members of parliament should be the ones which are loudest and talk to their governments to prevail on them to stop the war because of its negative effects.
Right. Totally agree with you, Mrs. Nqakula.
Sudut Dengar Parlemen. Sudut Dengar Parlemen.
Now we're talking about the relationship between Indonesia and South Africa, who's been very great relation for the past so many years, for many decades. So what do you think we can improve on that?
Well, I think there's a lot we can work on. I know that at government level, at the executive level, there's a lot of work which is being done between South Africa, trade relations between South Africa and Indonesia. And of course, you know that this is one of the countries our former president, late President Mandela, was very fond of, very sentimental, and it's one of those countries he visited immediately after his release from prison. And this was a clear demonstration of the seriousness of the relations, the seriousness he took of Indonesia. And by the way, since his visit here, he started wearing Indonesian shirts to his last day. He couldn't wear any other shirt other than Indonesia. And that's the kind of sentiment he expressed through his dress code. I think that from the side of Parliament, there is a lot we can do together with Indonesia. One of the things which we are now considering as the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa is to establish what you find in other parliaments. We have focus groups in South Africa. Focus groups like your focus groups on the CPA, focus group on IPU, and so on. We now want to establish what is called friendship groups. And one of the countries we would want to prioritize is Indonesia, that would have a friendship group that would allow for an exchange of information and programs between the two parliaments. So we attach a lot of importance to the relations between, we have diplomatic relations, we have an embassy here in Jakarta. And we believe that through that parliamentary friendship group, which we would want to establish, a lot of work can be done between the two countries and even strengthen the work, the relations between the two governments.
Definitely, we need to strengthen our relationship between the Republic of Indonesia as well as the Republic of South Africa. Mrs. Nqakula, this is such an interesting topic we have discussed with you. We really appreciate time for coming to our studio.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I hope that when your speaker comes to
South Africa?
Parliament, of course, we don't have a building, We just have Parliament because we continue to do the work of Parliament. We continue to do our oversight work. We continue to pass pieces of legislation. But we don't have a building from where we function. Our Parliament was burnt down, unfortunately, beginning of the year on the 2nd of January. But still, there's a lot of excess of activity, and I would hope that Madam Speaker of Indonesia will find the time at some point. We will invite her to come through to our Parliament, and just when we launch that friendship group, because we would want to start immediately. There's another country we've just agreed with to launch in February, and following that, I would like to invite her to come over and we can launch the Indonesia South Africa Parliamentary Friendship Program.
Right. Thank you once again, Mrs. Nqakula. Please do enjoy your day in Indonesia.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Distinguished audiences, that to be all for the special edition of P20 event. I'm Sudut saying goodbye.